What's the fastest possible solo you can reach in a diplomacy game, where solo means just a victory? Well, this is a question that I posed myself after my first solo in a classic game, which is the one displayed on screen. I was Germany, and even though I had won some variants in some variant maps, this was my first solo in a classic map. I reached this solo in 1906, which is pretty early. And this was due to some players going into civil disorders and some other players being inexperienced and doing some mistakes. So I'm not bragging about this solo, even though I have to admit that it looks awesome. But 1906 is pretty early, so how early can you actually win this game? Assuming that you have mind control over your adversaries and that you can actually control their moves and convince them to move out of their centers and so that you can take them. How fast can you actually win? Well, in my opinion, initially before preparing for this video, I thought that the earliest possible solo was a 1903 Russian solo. Why Russian? Because Russia starts out with 4 centers: St. Petersburg, Warsaw, Moscow, and Sevastopol. So it has more potential growth and borders a lot of centers. So I had actually thought out which were the centers that Russia could reach in only 3 years to win the game. Of course, this won't ever happen in a real game because the other players won't defend themselves, and even if Russia has the most awesome alliance structure and is the most persuasive person alive, it probably won't matter. As soon as the other players see a Russia that is growing exponentially, they will try to stop them. This doesn't mean that Russia can't actually solo. Russia is in press games one of the most likely powers to solo actually, but it's almost impossible that Russia solos in only 3 years. I actually don't know if it has ever happened in the history of this game, in a serious game. But just out of curiosity, I started sandboxing on Backstabber to see if this rule applied only to Russia or if also other countries could solo only in 3 years of game. And I discovered something really interesting. So let me show you. First, I discovered that Russia is not the only power that can actually solo in 1903. In this map, you can see that Germany can also solo in 1903. This Germany on this map has exactly 18 supply centers, and this is the end of the year 1903. No country can solo before 1903, and this was my only try with Germany, so I don't know if Germany can reach more than 18 centers. I think that it can't, but you're welcome to try it out. And I didn't actually experiment with other powers. I was only willing to prove that Russia was not the only one that could. I'm willing to bet that if Germany can solo in 1903, probably Austria can too, because Austria is another central power bordering lots of supply centers. And I'm also willing to bet, I'm actually pretty sure, that England, I tried with England and I couldn't solo in only 3 years, so because of the difficulty with fleets and convoys. So basically I think that England, Turkey, Italy and France are probably unable to solo in 3 years, but they can for sure solo in 4. Every country can solo in 1904 potentially, given the ideal circumstances in which you have mind control over your opponents and you actually can convince them to get out of their centers. And like for example in this German solo that you're seeing, to achieve this I moved the Austrian units out of Vienna and Trieste and so on. And of course I didn't move the other units. This is just the ideal situation, which would make for a very, very boring game. But I don't know, if you're Professor Xavier from the X-Men and you can control the mind of others, this would be one of your German solos, I think, and then you would quit diplomacy because you wouldn't have any fun. So Germany can solo in 1903 with 18 centers. I'm willing to bet that Austria can too. Probably the other powers cannot, unlike Russia, which is the power that can reach a solo most easily. In my sandboxing of an attempt of soloing with Russia in this ideal situation I mentioned, I managed to reach 24 supply centers with Russia in only 3 years. So it's an amazing amount, 6 more than the ones I reached with Germany, which were only 18. I don't know if Russia can surpass this 24 limit. But you're welcome to try. I don't think so. In this specific sandbox, you can see that Russia has conquered all of Germany, Austria, Turkey, the Balkans, most of Italy, Scandinavia, Holland, and also Edinburgh. Of course, I just moved the Russian units and moved the enemy units outside of their centers when Russia was going to invade them. But I actually did more than this. I tried to construct a possible game in which, even though players are playing really badly, they're doing possible moves. So I made a sandbox in which every player is moving, but they're basically blind to the Russian menace. And I'll show you now. Okay, so let's analyze this fake game that I improvised, trying to make it as believable as possible, even though it's going to become pretty absurd as time goes on. If you were to see Spring 1901 like this, you will probably not think much of it. Russia is opening north to Galicia, Black Sea, Gulf of Bothnia, and St. Petersburg. Not a typical opening, but certainly a known one. Let's say that Russia has convinced Turkey to DMZ Black Sea, so Turkey is moving Ankara to Constantinople, and that's why Russia gets into Black Sea. Russia has also convinced Austria to DMZ Galicia, and Austria is then opening in a way that defends Trieste. This is all possible. These are not the most common openings for these countries, but they can surely be made. Italy is opening in the standard way, but moving to Piedmont, and Germany and France are advancing in Burgundy, while England is opening anti-French. Also, Germany is moving Kiev to Holland so that Germany cannot bounce Sweden. So in the following turn, this is also pretty believable. I mean, it's not really believable that people wouldn't notice the Russian menace, but it's believable that people could do some moves like this. Germany cannot bounce Russia and Sweden, so Russia takes Sweden. Russia also takes Norway because England, knowing that they would bounce in Norway, doesn't even try and supports themselves into Belgium. And Russia guesses right in Austria, moving to Budapest, while Austria tries to cover Vienna, so takes Budapest. This is the strangest part, but let's say that Turkey didn't know where to cover if Constantinople and Ankara and really wanted to get out into the Aegean, so you get into Constantinople. Pretty unlikely, but it's not impossible. Okay, so in the winter, we see that I built as Russia 2 fleets and 2 armies, and I gave the other powers believable builds, except maybe England, which is building in Liverpool. So still focusing on France, even though Russia already has 8 centers, which is crazy in 1901. But in spring 1902, I'm shuffling units. Let's say that Italy taps Trieste because, I don't know, Italy decides to be your friend so that Austria cannot retake Budapest. And for some reason, Italy is also moving to the Eastern Mediterranean, and Turkey decides to bounce them because Italy had announced this move so that Russia can move to Sweden. So this means that Italy is your best friend right now because they're impeding Turkey and Austria from stopping your advance. At the same time, for some reason, England is also completely blind to your existence and isn't trying to stop you. Germany is forced to support Holland instead of bouncing you out of Baltic Sea. And so in 1902, you managed to take Denmark, to slip into North Sea, Romania, Ankara, Smyrna. For some reason, Italy taps Greece so that this attack from Turkey works, so you retain Constantinople and you actually take Vienna with Italy's help. So as you can see, these moves are becoming a little bit less believable than in 1901 because people are not defending from you, but let's assume that they are unable to see the huge, immense threat that you are. I know that's not gonna happen in a game, but this means that with these somewhat possible moves, in which people are not literally letting you into their centers, but they're not defending as well, you are already at 13 in 1902. Amazing, right? The solo is within your reach, and at this point, with this kind of players, it's basically unavoidable. But can you reach it in 1903? Let's see. So in spring 1903, Turkey and Austria have had enough. They're bored of this game, they're angry at England and Italy, and even a little bit at Germany that are not doing anything to stop you, so they're throwing to you. Austria has told you, come get Serbia and Trieste, I'm taking Venice from Italy because screw Italy, and Turkey has told you the same. About Bulgaria, they just want this game to end, which is something that can happen, unfortunately. And Germany seems to be of the same opinion, and they're letting you take both Kiev and Berlin. At the same time, for some reason, I don't know, England decided to bring the fleet in Liverpool, so they can't actually defend Edinburgh, so you take it. And in the last turn of the game, you force Munich, you support Kiev so you can't lose it, Edinburgh is yours, and actually Austria decides, for good measure, to support you into Venice while exiting, and you also take Greece, which Turkey and Austria are not defending. So at the end of the game, in winter 1903, you have 22 supply centers, and most of the known world is yours, and you won this game in just 3 years. Now, this is a worse outcome than the 24 center solo that I showed you earlier, but in this I moved the other units, and even though they were doing extremely suboptimal and bad moves, they were actually somewhat being in your way, and so I couldn't quite reach 24, but you can actually reach 22 with the other powers moving, even though they're moving really badly. Of course, this is never gonna happen in a real game, right? This is just a Russian player wet dream. Who would dream of soloing in 1903? Yeah, of course not. You can't. But what about 1904? Or even 1905? Is it possible? Yup.